Hi, good evening. I'm Lonnie Stonich, the Executive Director of FAN. We're a nonprofit that presents programming exploring human development across the lifespan. I'm honored to welcome you to tonight's conversation between Professor Michael Norton and Professor Sam Sommers. Thanks for joining us. FAN's YouTube channel has an archive of over 350 videos of past events, so be sure to subscribe to that channel to get updates when new recordings are posted. And now for some introductions. We are so pleased and excited to welcome back Mike Norton to FAN. He is the Harold M. Brierley Professor of Business Administration at Harvard Business School. His research topics range from the hazards of humble bragging to the rewards of matchmaking and volunteering, and he has been published in top academic journals as well as popular media outlets such as the Wall Street Journal, CNN, Forbes, and the New York Times. He co-authored Happy Money, The Science of Smarter Spending with Elizabeth Dunn, which was named by the Washington Post as a book every leader should read. It was for Happy Money that we first met Mike. We hosted him in 2016 for a couple events about that book. It's so great as well. Joining him is his friend. We just found out how long they've known each other. His friend and colleague, Sam Sommers, who is professor and chair in the Department of Psychology at Tufts University. He is a social psychologist and director of the Racial Equity and Diversity Lab at Tufts, which conducts experimental social psychological research aimed to better understand and address the causes and consequences of contemporary racism. Sam has written two general audience books titled Situations Matter and This Is Your Brain on Sports, and his research has been featured in the New York Times, Harper's, Good Morning America, and Last Week Tonight with John Oliver. And now let's welcome Mike Norton and Sam Sommers to FAN.
Thank you so much. It is lovely to be with everyone here this evening. I am honored and privileged to be serving as the Q portion of this Q&A in this conversation. Dr. Norton, thank you so much for being here, and again for inviting me to tag along and be able to start the conversation and ask you a few questions.
The first time you've called me Dr. Norton. That's very formal.
Don't get used to it. Dr. Norton, Mike, if I may, yes, I've been a fan of your work for quite some time. I might presume to have some seniority on that front on this call. Maybe there are folks who have been aware of your work, but I've been aware of it for a long time. But we also probably have people on this call who don't know you and don't know your book, haven't read your book yet. I was hoping you could start us off by giving us a sense of what your book's about, the narrative arc of it. What is it that someone who's coming to this fresh should know about what you've written?
Yeah, so Lonnie mentioned this book that I co-wrote with Liz Dunn now 10 years ago on money and happiness. And one of the things that we were really interested in that research was thinking not so much about, like if you were a billionaire, would you be happy? But what are the little changes you can make in your everyday life with your money to change how happy you are? $5, $10, small amounts of money. One of the things we showed was that giving it away, it turns out, makes you happier than spending it on yourself. But that was where I got interested in little behaviors that we engage in or could engage in more of on an everyday basis, that they aren't huge life changes, but they're kind of little things that we can do. And that's what led me into rituals, because it's when you think about people's days, from the moment we get up, people have a morning ritual to, when we go to bed, often people have an evening ritual as well. They kind of pattern our days. And I get very interested in what they're doing. If we're doing them so much all the time, what are they really doing for us? And could we do more of them to change our emotions?
Interesting. And that leads me to want to ask you, what exactly we're talking about when you say ritual. Because my bet is there are people who hear you say that and think this is going to be a conversation about how I should decorate my house for the holidays, or this is going to be a conversation about religious rites. And other ritual could mean, to some people, maybe negative connotation of you're talking about a daily ritual, but there's also, we talk about the mundane nature of routine and falling into a rut. So I guess, what are you talking about when you are writing about ritual?
It was interesting because when we started studying rituals, I think we thought we were going to study the other kind, the holiday kind or the religious kind, the kind that have either family history or cultural history or religious history behind them. And when we started out, we would ask people questions kind of to get at those. So we would say something for a funeral, for example. We would just ask people, what did you do? Think of someone you loved who passed away. What did you do afterward. Not what ritual did you do, that kind of gives it away, but literally just what did you do in the days following that? And when people said, when we thought they would tell us about funerals and religious rituals, and they did say that. They said, this is my faith, and in my faith, it's 2 days or 1 day or 5 days or whatever their faith told them to do. But then they would write, but I also did this other thing. And the other thing was something that was often extremely idiosyncratic to that person. Like it wasn't in a book that's 4,000 years old. It was clear that the person came up with it themselves. Like one woman wrote, I washed his car every weekend the way he used to do. There's definitely not cars 4,000 years ago, for example. We know that one's not a long history, but you can absolutely feel what you know everything about that couple, right? He clearly loved his car. He washed it every weekend. She decided that she would keep doing that kind of to honor his memory. And that was the kind that got, I think, me and all my collaborators really interested, was the ones that we come up with ourselves, because those hadn't been studied quite as much. We have lots of evidence of the historical kind, but we don't have a lot of evidence of like, what were people doing little things in, 1010 or whatever it might be. We just don't have it recorded. So that was an exciting part of the research, was to say, what are people coming up with all the time? And can these things also make a difference in a way, maybe not the same way that, cultural and religious traditions do, but what do these little ones do for us?
Yeah, well, you just said the T word, and I was going to ask you about the T word of tradition. And it sounds to me like there's some overlap in the Venn diagram here of what you have in mind when you write about and talk about ritual, but that there's also some space there between them. In that, you gave us just an example of a ritual that one might have developed that clearly isn't that long-standing a ritual. But what are there critical differences we should be thinking about in terms of semantically what you mean, but also the consequences of, say, a tradition versus a ritual and how they come about and what their impacts might be?
Yeah, I tend to think of traditions. So traditions can develop very quickly, is one thing. So lots of rituals, even with just one generation in a family, they start to say it's a tradition. They use the same word as they would use for, a 2,000-year-old ritual. They say, this is a tradition in our family. So we're actually kind of quick to establish traditions. When we can talk about when we had kids and the new traditions you come up with your kids when you're a parent, they just happen. You're not really trying to do them, but you just start having them. So I think sometimes rituals are little actions that really don't have any history necessarily. You're truly coming up with it yourself. And yet then we often start building in them and around them so that they become more like traditions. They do have a history for it. Even what we do when we're getting ready in the morning, it's totally idiosyncratic to us. But if you've been doing it for 30 years, it's getting to be sort of like a tradition for you, right? It has the element of history and repetition that can really change the emotional impact of these things.
And I guess that leads to the obvious, I think, to me, logical next question. What is the impact? So you talked about emotional impact. What is the impact? Why is this an important enough topic to be writing a whole book on and to be having a conversation about tonight?
I'm not sure that it is, but I'll try. Yeah, I think if you think of something like marriages or partnerships, for example, cultures give us a few days where we're supposed to kind of honor and thank our spouse or our partner. Like we have a wedding day, most cultures. We often have an anniversary of the wedding day that we do every year. We might have their birthday and our birthday where we do something. Maybe Valentine's Day is another thing that culture has told us. For some reason, in the middle of February, you should celebrate your love. Not the middle of July, but the middle of February. But that's only a few days every year. And it turns out, and you're married, marriage is every day. It doesn't just happen like 5 days a year. So what are the things that we do in between those big events that can actually shape our relationships with other people? The big events are great, like going out for dinners and all these buying gifts and things like that. Of course, those are important, but it's often the little things, that everyday things that couples come up with that I think give them more of a sense that the relationship is solid and committed, and that it has been going on for some time and it will keep going on for some time, in a way that Valentine's Day, it's only once a year. So there's too much time in between for me to know, are we really in this together? Do we really have a shared vision?
So one can hear as you're talking about the potential positive impact for relationship of rituals. If and that's something that seems interesting and I want to explore. But before I do that, what about just as an individual? My sense of identity, my daily sense of being and reason for being out in the world and what I'm seeking to accomplish. How is that shaped by ritual? What's the relevance or importance of rituals as for me as an individual?
I, even though we've known each other for some time, I actually don't know your answer to this question, but can I ask you
You
a
you
stupid
may
question?
you may.
So in the morning, when you're getting ready, do you shower first and then brush your teeth, or do you brush your teeth and then shower?
I usually orange juice first, then brush the teeth, then work out and shower.
Then work out and shower.
Yeah.
And how would you feel if I told you to switch up the order tomorrow morning? Like really
Over my
think
dead
about
body. Not
it.
gonna
You
no.
would,
I would feel uncomfortable and out of sorts.
uh-huh. And why? What's the,
It's just I'm gonna be off kilter. It's not the way I do it. It's not the way I roll.
hmm. And how do you feel when you do it the way you roll?
Normal.
Normal. Like good, ready, here I go.
Sometimes better, sometimes less, but it
Uh-huh.
feels I know what I'm getting myself into. I'm not waking up in a hotel that doesn't have the ability to do those things where I don't have my orange juice or I haven't forgotten my toothbrush. At least I've got a shot at things going well.
Yeah. So that's if you I've asked lots of audiences and lots of people all over the world. It's about 50-50 on brushing first and then showering or showering first and then brushing. People often will be disgusted if somebody does it differently from them. They're like how could you possibly not brush your teeth first? What kind of a person are you? But of course, half of the people are doing it the other way. But the key question actually, and that actually gets to one of which we should talk about the negatives of rituals, which is actually if I'm doing it the good way, then all the other ways are bad. But in this case, the key question is the second one I asked you, which is how would you feel if I told you to switch it? And there again, about half of people truly say, I couldn't care less. Like, what difference would it make? What order? I got to get this, I got to have juice, I got to brush my teeth. It doesn't matter to me. And they actually think the question is ridiculous. Like, what do you mean? Of course I could change the order. And half of people are like you. They're like, I don't want to do that. I can't exactly say why. I like my way. My way is good. And if I do it a different way, I'd feel weird. You said it weird or off kilter or whatever. And that I think starts to get at this kind of sense of what these little rituals are and the role they play in our everyday life. They're not rituals like people in robes with candles chanting. There's these little small behaviors that we engage in. And the reason I use that example is because I can't think of behaviors that are more mundane than like, brushing your teeth and shower. They're not like emotionally rich events. And yet, even with those, we develop little tiny ways of doing them that start to matter to us quite a bit. And they change our emotional experience. And that was, I think, what was so interesting is that they actually do change our emotional experience over the course of the day for better and for worse. So if you do it the way you like to do it, it's true that you're glad you did it. But if your kid interrupts you and you can't do the thing you wanted to do, it's almost like high risk, high reward rituals. So they're not just great. It's not a book that's like more rituals is always great. It's definitely not that. But what we see is that they prompt emotion, all kinds of different emotions in our everyday lives. And in that way, they're useful for us because we use them to access any sorts of emotions that we might need to get at. Like we use them for funerals and for weddings. We use them to amp ourselves up and calm ourselves down. They're really this like domain general thing that the humans developed that we're constantly using to we do other things to shape our emotions too, of course. But one of the things humans really like to do for whatever reason is use rituals.
Interesting. I feel like I answered too quickly. If I had known that the people in robes with candles in my room was an option, I would have gone with that before the orange juice or the toothbrushing. Well, so that leads me to wonder then, how do we get there? Like, how does this happen? Is it just dumb luck and reinforcement? I'm a psychologist like you. I'm teaching intro psychology this semester to several hundred bright-eyed, bushy-tailed 18-year-old first-year college students, and we talk about developmental psychology, the trajectory of being at a young age and through trial and error, just sort of figuring things out. I don't really have control over the social world around me, and all of a sudden one day a couple fingers go into my mouth and I find that pleasurable, and I sort of, I purr a little bit. I like it. I keep doing it. I soothe myself that way. I didn't know it was a thing, but now that I've done it, that was good. I want to keep doing that. I mean, are we really talking at that level? Like how did my okay, I get why I'm having the orange juice first, orange juice after brushing teeth, no good. But where is
Yeah.
this coming from? The car washing example you gave, is it just a serendipitous thing that we do and it's reinforcing so we keep doing it? Is there something more meaningful? Is it more conscious? What's the origin story for these rituals?
I think this is going to sound like I'm comparing college students to pigeons, but I'm really not. But there's a amazing study. If other people have taken intro psych, B.F. Skinner is a famous psychologist who was really interested in like operant conditioning and learning, and how do we get pigeons to learn to peck that button instead of that button by giving them food rewards and things like that. So it's very practical research on training pigeons to do stuff. But in this one experiment that he did, and I'm not sure why he did it because it's very like counter his thing. He just had he had these machines that pigeons that could like pull levers and peck and stuff like that. And he would try to train them like, hey, if you peck the red thing 6 times, that's how you get food. And they could do it. But in this one, what he did was he just had food arrive completely randomly, independent of anything the pigeons did. Just food would come out every so often. And if pigeons were smart, they would do nothing, right? As soon as you realize you have no control over it, you just sit back and wait for the food. And of course, that's completely not what pigeons do. What pigeons do is they keep pecking and pulling levers and stuff like that. And they actually start to develop little rituals. So like in adjoining cages, one pigeon will come up with like 3 lever pulls and 2 red buttons. And the pigeon in the next cage over is like 4 blue buttons and 1 lever pull. And like, I'm going to move my head back and forth like this before I do it. I mean, it's fascinating actually what they come up with. And I think there's 2 things there. One is faced with complete uncertainty. One of the things that pigeons turn to at least is ritual to try to feel some sense of control over it. And it's not like there's a magical one that we all end on. Like imagine that what happened was every pigeon independently came up with 6 pecks. That would be super fascinating, but that's not how they work. Actually, it's often idiosyncratic to the pigeon or to the person. And I do think for a lot of rituals in our lives, and especially for little kids also, we have such like the older that I've gotten, and I'm sure you have the same experience, the more you realize that you have no control over anything at all, basically in life. It's just happening, and here we go, and you do the best you can. And in the face of having no control, you maybe could just sit back and let life happen. And instead, we do all kinds of things to feel like we have some sort of control. And one of the things that we use, just like pigeons use, are rituals. Like when I do my morning thing where I shower and then brush and then whatever, I'm feeling like I've got some control over the day now. Like I started the day off well, I'm going to get through this day. It may or may not be the best way to get through your day, but that sense of almost existential lack of control that even pigeons have. I think that's not every ritual, that's what's underlying it, but many of them, there's some element of grasping at a sense that we have control over our outcomes and things that we do matter. And rituals help to give us that sense sometimes.
Yeah. I'm going to throw a proposition at you. You can agree, disagree with me. To me, one of the interesting aspects of this, so let's take a domain, sports. You and I are both sports fans, as anyone watching can tell, also phenomenally, athletic specimens in our own rights.
That's right.
In fact, you and I have had many a conversation, dare I say, argument and fight over questions related to sports in our friendship. We also come down on different sides of important. This is an interfaith friendship. You as a Red Sox fan, me as a Yankees fan, among other differences. But I think it's really interesting the way that some of these rituals emerge at the group level. Like as an individual in my morning routine, yes. As a couple, you talked about that. But the idea that these things emerge seemingly organically, even at the group level, sometimes with some consistency across groups. So again, we'll throw some sports and pop culture together. There are songs that have gone from B-sides and unreleased tracks on albums to ubiquitous at sporting events throughout the world, right? The White Stripes, right? That song, that you hear, you could be at a football game in England or Italy. You could be at a college football game in the United States, a baseball game, and you'll hear, Seven Nation Army playing and people singing along to it. Mr. Brightside and the Killers. So there are songs that seem to have done that, but then there are also these very idiosyncratic local flavor that have emerged. So you and I both live in the Boston area. When one goes to a Boston Red Sox game at Fenway Park, one in the middle of the eighth inning hears Neil Diamond and Sweet Caroline. And it's a song associated now with the Boston Red Sox. And a lot of people are like, oh, right, they've been playing that for hundreds of years. No, it's much more of a short time span. And it seems to have evolved from someone was a big fan and they played it and the team rallied and they just kept doing it. Sort of like, not to compare all Red Sox fans to pigeons in boxes, though that gives me some pleasure as a Yankees fan. But similarly at Yankee Stadium and YMCA during the changing of the bases. So the idea that these things happen and not every, but many sports stadiums, many teams have a song or a ritual. They jump around at the University of Wisconsin to the song Jump Around between the third and the fourth quarter. These things emerge and become part of, again, I don't want to offend anyone, but dare I say, a near religious kind of just observance in a region. So these rituals are operating individually at group levels, but also at a macro cultural and societal level in really interesting ways that I don't think we talk about. You can disagree with me or agree with me on that. I don't. To me, that's interesting. Is that consistent with what you're talking about here?
I would love to say that's not interesting and move on. No, I think what's so interesting to me is music has nothing to do with sports, and yet almost every sports team has some song, and every fan group has some song, and so the song is very idiosyncratic. But for some reason, we're like, you know what we need? We're watching the people throw the ball around. Do you know what we should bring to this experience is a song that we all shout along with in unison. And there's not any particular reason to shout along in unison to a song. And yet you see it happening again and again. And you're exactly right that often the germ of the song is it happened randomly and the team did well. Just even once. It doesn't need to be like you won, 10 championships in a row. But the germ very often is we did this weird thing and we won like 3 games in a row. And now we're going to do it for the next 100 years. And even though you lose some games, it's like, well, it worked once. And if we didn't do it, we'd probably be worse off. So let's just keep playing Sweet Caroline until the end of time.
Right. And now the people doing it don't know that story. It's just part of it's built in. It's a built-in part of the experience. It brings positive emotion. There's cohesion with the people around you. These rituals have a self-fulfilling aspect of them, which I think is an energy of their own that transcends what they bring to, sort of rationally, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
And I'm interested in sports. I could have the sports conversation all day. I know that's not necessarily everyone's cup of tea. So I want to ask you similar questions.
Well, I will say though about sports, like if you think of something like the wave,
yeah,
that's an insane behavior. You know what I mean? That 50,000 people spontaneous are like, hey, everybody stand up at the exact time so that it can keep going around. And if you're a wave doer, you're very angry with people who won't do it.
Yeah.
Again, the wave has nothing to do with what's happening on the field. I guess you could make some argument it's distracting to the opposition or something, but why do we engage in things like that as well? We're trying to get in synchrony with everybody for some reason because we really like to do that. And we do it like in our families, but then we also do it in these huge, huge, massive events as well. There's something in us that loves to have the trappings of ritual. I guess I would use the word ritual, but you could call it, other words as well.
Yeah.
And humans have had it like forever, like as far back as we can track. Humans are like, we should really do a group thing. Let's all do the same thing at the same time. Why don't we just try that out and see how well it goes?
Well, and so the group thing I sort of can wrap my head around as a social psychologist. We're inherently social animals, but it feels at the individual level, it's got to be a fine edge here, right? I mean, I'll start with sports, but then pivot away. I mean, you think about rituals. You and I grew up in an era where one of your big players on the team that you were a fan of was certainly Nomar Garcia-Parra. If anyone's ever seen Nomar or not seen Nomar bat, YouTube it, right? There was stepping out of the batter's box. You undid your batting glove back. I mean, it went on. There was a whole ritual that was involved. And it worked for him, clearly. I mean, the guy was a great hitter, but there must be a fine line between ritual being something that's beneficial for you and being distracting or problematic. And again, I can pivot away from sports too. I mean, if we're thinking about just like health in general, I mean, when is a ritual productive for me and something that I want to do? And when is it something that is potentially destructive or deleterious to my performance? We have people on the call who are probably either clinicians of some sort themselves or have availed themselves, as many of us have, of the services of a clinician. When should we be encouraging people to find rituals, and when is a ritual problematic?
I'm glad that you brought it up, because again, rituals aren't just good. That I think they risk reward is maybe the right analogy here, but even with, for example, athletes who have, if you want to spend waste a day, just Google any athlete's name and the word ritual, and you're going to get whatever it is that, Rafael Nadal, Serena Williams, everybody's got some very elaborate ritual. But the question is, I guess, do they help? But even more, I think, to your point, can they hurt? And we do see sometimes. So there are cases of athletes who have gotten so wrapped up in the ritual that it ends up impacting their performance negatively, because they're so focused on doing it correctly that they're no longer doing it in the service of the thing they were trying to do. So if you think about rituals, we're often, not always, but we're often doing them in the service of something else. Like, I'm going to do my morning ritual like yours in order to feel good about my day and go to work. The point of doing it is in order to do something else. Or Nadal or Garcia Parra, the point of doing it is to get ready to actually step in the batter's box and hit. And what can happen, of course, is that you're so wrapped up in the ritual that you don't leave your house in the morning. Your morning routine becomes such a ritual that you can't stop washing, for example. I'm no clinical psychologist, and as you know, my wife is, so whenever I talk about clinical psychology, she's horrified. But if you do think of something like obsessive compulsive disorder, one of the ways that's diagnosed is the ritual interfering with your other goals in life? And if they're not interfering with that, we might think, wow, that person's doing a lot of that behavior, but they're still leaving the house, they're still socializing the way they want to. It's when it starts to really interfere. Many people, for example, double check that their door is locked when they leave for work. Of course it's locked, you locked it, but a lot of us like to double check. And we're doing that so that we feel like, okay, my place is safe, I can go out and have my day and then come back later. What can happen with something like OCD is that the checking the lock becomes the behavior itself. And I'm checking the lock in order to check the lock. And that kind of loop means that I'm stuck. I lost the link between what I was trying to get done. And that, I think, is when you start to say, now the ritual is definitely not helping, and if anything, interfering. I'm not sure we know, it's if it's 4 minutes, it's fine. And if it's, 5 minutes, it's not. I think that's very idiosyncratic to a person. But I do think thinking about when they get in our way is a very useful way to think about it. And athletes do it, of course, but people, when you ask people, like, if you have a big presentation at work, something like that, what do you do? Like, an astonishing number of people say, I go into the bathroom and I look under the stall and make sure nobody's there. And then I say things to myself out loud in the mirror. I mean, it's actually shockingly common. At least you've done it once in your life, and many people do it every time. If you stood in the bathroom and just kept shouting at yourself in the mirror and missed the meeting, well, we would say, that probably wasn't the best strategy for doing well in the meeting. If it's something that makes you feel like now you're ready to have the meeting, then it's like, compared to what else? Compared to sitting in a chair and just being anxious, may as well try something like shouting at yourself in the mirror. Like Rafael Nadal said, somebody said, why do you need to, he does this crazy pre-serve ritual, including he picks his wedgie, this really elaborate thing. And he was asked, what do you think would happen if you didn't do it? And he said, yeah, no, I know I don't need to do it, but I just feel ready when I do. And I think that's kind of the mindset that many people have. You obviously could brush your teeth in the different order, but I just feel a little bit readier if I'm going to do it in my way.
Yeah. I appreciate you comparing my morning routine to Rafael Nadal's
Yeah.
performance on the tennis
By the
court.
way, if you copy his pre-serve routine, you are automatically as good as him. It's an
Yeah.
amazing, yeah. So just try it
Yeah.
out. Mhm.
So we have talked about performance, and we've talked a lot about a domain you and I both share a lot of interest in the world of sports. You alluded to this domain earlier when it comes to relationships, and I was wondering if I could ask you a little bit about that. And I think you
I'm not
write.
really that kind of psychologist either, though. But
I understand. I understand. But I believe that you have made arguments along the lines of what 2/3 of relationships, people in relationships report some sort of relationship ritual, and that there are specific lessons we can even learn from relationship rituals. Many of us are in relationships, be they intimate romantic relationships, be they platonic friendship, working relationships. What are some of the lessons that we should all know about rituals that will help us think through the potential for relationships, also some of the pitfalls?
romantic relationships to me are among the most interesting because they're so our private rituals are just us. I'm just shouting at myself in the mirror. When you get to the level of even our families, they have history to them, like, well, your grandfather liked this kind of pie, so we're going to keep having it. With couples, often you're starting from scratch. It's like the two of you got stuck together in a place and you're just completely creating everything from scratch. You're pulling from your histories, of course, and yet you have to come up with things yourself and find compromises. And when we ask couples, it's same as funerals. Like, what do you do to when somebody passes away? And people say there was a funeral, but then I did this idiosyncratic thing. I listened to my mom's favorite song for 2 months when I went to work. Very personal things. Then it's the same with relationships. Like if we ask people, what do you do to with your spouse that's special, they'll say like Valentine's Day. And then they'll tell us these little tiny behaviors that they do that on their surface are meaningless. And yet, as soon as you hear that a couple does this, it feels very powerful. Like, I don't know why this is my favorite one, but this couple said every time before we eat, we clink our silverware together. Like silverware is, I think, the most mundane product humans have invented. You know what I mean? It's literally like to stab food and put it in your mouth. And they turned it now into something that's like clearly, and it's adorable, right? I mean, it's an expression of their love for each other. They've been doing it forever. They're going to do it forever. They have these like very special things. And when we look at the data, couples that have things like that are happier in their relationships than couples who don't. We don't know the causal direction. We can't randomly assign people to couples, unfortunately. That would be cool research, but we can't. But one of the reasons for that actually is when we ask people, how committed do you feel and how committed do you think your partner is? The rituals are a pretty good predictor of that. In other words, like day to day, if you could think about relationship as every single day you decide from scratch again, should I stay with this person or not? That's not how we treat it, but in a sense, we could. So how do I know, like, if it's not my birthday and you didn't get me a present, how do I know that you love me? You could say that to me, we could combine our finances, all kinds of stuff that we can do. But day to day, these little rituals, this clinking of the silverware, we see in the data, people say, yeah, that makes me feel like we're in this together. We have this, it's our thing. We do it together. We've been doing it for years. I have a feeling we're going to keep doing it for years. They're small and yet really, really meaningful. And one of the reasons we know they're so meaningful actually is because we haven't published this research actually, but we've asked people questions like, when your relationship ends and your now former partner engages in the following behaviors, how upset are you? So like they date somebody else and people are like, yeah, I don't love that. They marry someone else. You're like, I don't really love that. They have kids with somebody else. You're like, wow, but they're not really that bad. Like your exes are allowed to date other people. You might not like it, but they're allowed. When we ask people, how would you feel if they reused your ritual? That's the angriest. Much angrier than them moving on with their life and getting married. The idea that you would, if you looked over and saw your ex clinking silverware with somebody else, the rage, I mean, truly rage that people feel. And that shows you how important they are to us, right? Like it's a symbol, an emblematic thing about who we are, and it's our special thing. And you ruin it entirely if you recycle it.
Aren't psychologists great that way? How we love to say, here's how we're going to show how important something is. I'm going to threaten to take it away from you. I'm going to rub it in your face that you don't have it anymore. How do you feel now?
Yeah.
Well, and so you talked about, and I get the caveats about causality, right? What's causing what here, fair. But that makes me think that there are, and I don't want to say, I'm not saying this in a pejorative sense, not cynical, but that there are strategic ways that we can avail ourselves of the power of ritual. So if we're in a relationship that isn't going so well, can you force, not force, but can you come up with can you ritualize yourself into a better scenario? Or if you're as part of a blended family that's trying to create a new family unit, and the obstacles inherent to that, can rituals be a sort of lubricant to doing that more smoothly? Are there ways that we can be smart about how we avail ourselves of rituals?
One of my favorite, so I was teaching a freshman class this year also, and one of the things I do, some of the students are from the US, so they've celebrated Thanksgiving as a holiday, but they can't make the trip all the way home. Maybe they're from the West Coast or something. So what they do is they go to Thanksgiving with one of their friends who lives around here.
Yeah.
And you ask them afterward, I ask them afterward, how did it go? And they're like, they did it wrong. Like, what do you mean? What do you mean they did it wrong? They're like, I don't even know how to describe it. And they'll just, I mean, the pies are wrong.
They don't have the
timing
cranberry
is
sauce out of the
wrong.
can. Yeah.
Exactly. Like, you don't watch the Lions game ever. I mean, they just have all of these things that are completely wrong. And it smells wrong. The food's wrong, it smells wrong. So there's all of these things. And it's the first time they realize that they have a way of doing Thanksgiving. Because when you're younger, you're like, they make us do this thing. I don't know why we have to be here, until you encounter somebody else's. And then you say, oh my God, these people are terrible. And it happens with roommates, but of course it happens with romantic couples for sure. Interfaith, absolutely. But even without kind of faith differences, there's so many differences between families. And you do see couples trying to navigate, how are we going to take aspects of our rituals and combine them into something new? And what you see, the most successful couples actually each one will bring some things from their family, and then the couple will also come up with some new things themselves. So you kind of get the history and tradition thing, and you get but we're co-creating it together right now. It's our special thing. And most couples that last, I guess, do some form of that, where you compromise a little bit on the pies, like, well, okay, we'll have your pies, but we'll eat at my time. And then we'll do this other funny thing that, we didn't do with either of our families. Those seem to be the ways to bridge it a little bit more healthily, I guess. But the conflict around it is real. I mean, it's profound. The anger at doing Thanksgiving differently that people feel, again, shows you how powerful these rituals are.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that I'm taken by in how you talk about and write about this is the argument, and others have made it as well, but I think you're making it compellingly that, the world is a threatening and confusing and uncontrollable place. I think you just put it quite bluntly. 20 minutes ago, we don't really control anything, right? I mean, there's a lot of randomness and threat and ambiguity out there in the world. Certainly that's the case in relationships, for sure. It's also the case in many respects for professional life, right? For work, for the workplace, whether we're talking about the pandemic and post-pandemic smorgasbord of hybrid and remote and located in open floor plans and closed. There are all those machinations about being at work. But just in general, when you think about it, just the amount of time we spend with those families, the work families, and in that environment, I assume, and I know you've written about this, so I know the answer, is that rituals are important at work as well. In what ways, or ways we haven't talked about or thought about yet? I mean, for those of us who are in the workplace, or perhaps even trying to create a workplace that is going to bring out the best in those who work with us, what should we be thinking about when it comes to rituals for that?
It's when people think about rituals at work, they tend to think of things that management makes them do. Like they'll be like, the worst manager I ever had was this guy who would like watch TED Talks over the weekend and then come in on Monday and be like, now we're going to do this thing every morning, some breathing thing or something like that. And they're like, oh my God, this guy's the worst. I mean, literally, that's the worst boss they ever had. Or they think of corporate retreats and like forced trust falls and things like that. Right. So the idea of it, the initial reaction is very negative from employees, but it's because actually they're top down. But when we ask employees actually about their rituals at work, what they often tell us about are ones that they came up with themselves. Like that my team, so we asked, like in the same way we ask couples, is there anything the two of you developed that's special to you that you make sure to do regularly? And they say clink silverware. We ask teams literally the exact same question. Is there anything your team does that's special that you came up with that you make sure to do regularly? And they say really interesting, like one team had, it was a 5-person team, and they did this thing where each day of the week, someone was responsible for lunch. So on Monday, I got lunch for everybody. Then the rest of the days, they got lunch for me. It's lunch. Like we have to put food in our face around the middle of the day. So there's no meaning in lunch. And we could all just go get our own lunch. Maybe that would even be better. But they decided that what they would do is one day of the week, I take care of the rest of the team. And every other day of the week, someone on the team takes care of me. And they're saying basically, we're not just like coworkers putting food in our faces, we're a team. We care about each other. And one of their values is that we really care about each other. And when you look at the rituals that teams come up with, there's often some value underlying it. It's true of family rituals as well. Like, what are we trying to communicate through this ritual that we came up with? And you can think of all kinds of ways. I have this, as you know, this lab group that we creatively named Nerd Lab. And one of our rituals and we didn't sit down and say, we need a ritual. It just sort of happened, is we do this thing called Random Ideas Day. And what it is you have to bring in a random idea that you will not work on. That's the only rule. You can't actually work on the idea. You have to throw it out after the meeting. And what we're trying to do there is say what really, really matters is ideas. Like that's the thing that we're trying to get in our group is creativity and ideas. And we have this little ritual to kind of solidify and reinforce it. Hopefully we do it in our everyday behaviors, but you also insert these things to be like, no, it's creativity. We didn't do the let's get lunch for everybody once a week. I think we love and care about each other, but the core value I think is creativity. And so our ritual takes a different route than other rituals on teams. And with families as well, when you think of the family rituals that people do, they're very often some underlying value that the family shares or that the parents are trying to force on their children in order to have that value be represented.
Do rituals help us understand political behavior? I mean, we are in an environment where we just had an election in this country. The idea, a lot of ideas come to my mind. I mean, the notion that we had an election just now that reputable polling and data indicates that in terms of policy preference, one candidate in one party's policy is far more popular, statistically significantly, let's say, more popular than in other parties, but not the party that necessarily won the election. We have, time and time again in this country, and I think other countries as well, seen this scenario where voters have spoken by their selections, and a significant number of them in the immediate aftermath have said, wait, I voted for what? That means what exactly? No, I sort of like that policy, that insurance coverage. I can't have that anymore. I don't understand. Or we're going to be doing what when it comes to immigration, with whom? And are rituals playing a role there? Again, we've been saying for better or for worse, but sometimes for worse in terms of whether it's tribalism or, I mean, is it a ritual that I often base if I'm a human being like many who've been studied by those who do political psychology, bases in part my assessment of politicians based on I like the cut of their jib and they look like they're competent, or maybe I'm not even thinking that, but I feel that. Are rituals relevant in politics, and are they potentially causing us some problems?
I think, so we've done research looking at the positive, and we've talked about it a bit, the positive aspects of group rituals, like at teams at work and things like that. But the downside is, and we alluded to this really early, is that if my way is the good way, then I could just stop there. But sometimes we say, therefore the other way is the bad way. Sometimes when I give talks, I'll have everybody stand up and I'll put up a ritual, like on the PowerPoint that I made up. It's not like a ritual from history. And people start doing it. It's like, clap once, stomp once, clap 3 times, stomp 3 times. And a couple of things happen when I put it up. First is everybody syncs up very quickly, even though I don't tell them do it at the same time. We just like to clap at the same time. But what happens is I can either plant somebody or I can give some people different instructions slightly. And what happens is if somebody does it like if it's a one clap thing, but I clap 3 times, and you can hear no one else is clapping, and you can hear one person doing it differently. What the audience does, like they'll heads will swivel over, and the look on their face is honestly disgust. That's the look. Like what kind of a person could possibly clap 3 times at this moment when it's one clap? And I'd ask them, I say, what's the problem? They say, well, they're doing it wrong. And I say, I made this ritual up. You've never done it before in your life. But as you were doing it, you already decided that there's a correct way to do it. And if anyone isn't doing it the way that you do it, they're not just like different, they're wrong, and they're kind of like worthy of contempt. If it can happen with silly, hand clapping in some auditorium somewhere, you can see how quickly even minor differences in practices become huge differences in practice because they're not just differences, they're morally loaded, and my way is good and your way is bad. And that can blind us to all kinds of other things about our groups. All of our groups have positive and negative aspects, but when we do it the good way, I kind of focus on the good aspects of my group and not necessarily the bad aspects of my group. And the reverse for your group. I focus on the bad things or the wrong things instead of on the positives.
Yeah, I appreciate in how you write and talk and think about this and how you've sort of talked about it here this evening. You're not offering a one size fits all, more rituals equals more good, right? I mean, and as someone who, like you, but as someone who in my research studies racism, studies systemic forms of racism, its antecedents, its consequences, I can't help but think that in large part, I'm also studying rituals when I'm doing that the stereotypes that we rely on show serve many of the same quote unquote functions as the other rituals you're talking about, helping to make sense of a ambiguous and threatening and confusing world around us. Maybe making individuals sometimes feel better at the expense of others. And so I guess I think about that as we're having this conversation, that rituals, yes, tradition and glue that holds people together, but I'm not wrong to suggest that rituals are also sometimes leading us to make mistakes, sometimes leading us to be biased, to perpetuate and exaggerate biases. I mean, rituals are really there's a pretty broad continuum of potential outcomes of this reliance on rituals that we humans exhibit, right?
That's exactly right. And the anger that we can feel toward people who are doing rituals differently. One of the things that made people, speaking of being a psychologist and annoying people, we gave people scenarios of people changing rituals slightly. So for example, one of them was a city manager wants to move the commemoration of September 11th to September 12th because it will save money. And you can't. I mean, you could move any other thing to the 12th. Obviously, it doesn't matter at all. But the idea that someone would be trading off money or anything for this somber, important, defining event, it's unacceptable. And it shows you just how powerful these things are, that we hate other people who don't do it the way that we think it should be done.
Yeah. We've talked about a lot. We've gone from, Nomar Garcia Parra to Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, and we've sort of covered a wide range. I do want us to bend towards a positive and happy affect. As the author of Happy Money, I'd like us to have sort of happy Zoom ending here. So I have a question or two for you, just on the nature of what personally drew you to this. What was it and you talked a little bit about the work you and your lab are doing and how you discovered, somewhat surprisingly, the role that rituals are playing. What is it that has drawn you to? It is months, if not years, to write a book. What is it that has made you want to devote this much of your time and bandwidth to telling people in the world about rituals?
I think so. I've been studying rituals for more than 10 years, which is probably too long to study anything, but there it is. But I was studying them for a couple of years, but in a very removed fashion. In other words, like people are engaged in these kinds of things. What are they up to? But not really considering myself as a strong practitioner of rituals in my everyday life. I was just thinking, I don't do yoga, I don't meditate. I was thinking of things like that. Like those aren't things that I do. So let's understand why other people are doing them.
Mhm.
And then 8 years ago, as you know, something happened, which was my wife and I had a daughter. And you were like 10 years ahead of me in the daughter game, but you remember. And what happened was, uh, when you have a child, what they do is you go to the hospital, or maybe you have the child at home, and then everybody leaves and they're like, good luck.
Yeah.
And it's very upsetting. And talk about feeling out of control and the uncertainty and the worry. I mean, it's the most profound, well, there's many profound things in life, but it's certainly a profound event. And so what did we start doing? The big thing with new parents is sleep. Like, is the baby sleeping? Are you sleeping? Are they a good sleep? It's just nonstop with the sleeping talk with new parents. Everybody, it drives everybody crazy, but that's life at that moment. And what my wife and I started to do without saying, we didn't say like, let's structure something. We started to do repeated behaviors every day at bedtime to try to get her to sleep.
Yeah.
And they ended up being extremely elaborate. It was like, we're going to do these 2 songs, and then we're going to read this book, and then we're going to do a quick bath, and then we're going to read this other book, and then we need these 2 stuffed animals. Literally, we had a gray and brown bunny. We needed to have them in the crib with the, whatever. And we realized at some point, we were like, oh my God, it's like an insane ritual that we came up with to try to help her sleep. And I will say, it's completely unclear if it helped her to sleep. But I think in retrospect, it helped us feel like we had some control over what was happening, even when it didn't work. And if we skipped a step, we'd be like, we better start over.
Yeah.
I mean, she's never going to sleep if we forgot the bunny or whatever it might be. And for me, that was really a wake up. That's a bad pun, but like a wake up call on, oh my God, it wasn't even that I said, I'm studying rituals. Maybe I should try some out and see how they go. It wasn't at all. It just came out of us naturally. And when you ask parents, they're all like, oh my God. I mean, it resonates so powerfully. In fact, sometimes I ask my undergraduates to, as an assignment, to ask their parents to remember what their bedtime ritual was. And first off, these kids are like 18. First off, their parents absolutely remember it perfectly, and they get very emotional.
Yeah.
It brings them immediately back to the feeling of holding, like the stress you were feeling, but also the love you were feeling in a way that pictures don't do it, and just remembering things doesn't do it. There's something actually about remembering the ritual that I think lands differently emotionally for people. And that is one of the key things about ritual, actually, is that they give us access to these really, really powerful memories. Like, of course, we remember our grandmothers, but when we make the pie that they made and we eat it and it smells and tastes the same, they're back in a really different way than looking at a picture or even telling stories about them. And I think that's a gift, actually, that rituals give us, is they transport us sometimes back to hard things, but sometimes back to these really amazing memories.
Right. I mean, I think many of us can trace the trajectory of our lives through rituals, through these kinds of deeply ingrained memories that you're talking about. I mean, I am indeed a father of daughters, and yes, it was a few years before you, but our bedtime ritual was evolved into, it was 4 Beatles songs, me holding this colicky kid's head down, trying to get her to go to sleep at night, and then it evolves. She's now a college senior, and it evolves to me and her the night before she goes to college, her first year of school, playing guitar together, singing a couple songs together, the likes of which I still can't hear on the radio without crying with just those specific songs and that trajectory. And you talked about, it's interesting how evocative it's music, it's the taste of food. It is certain sort of smells and other, it's the full range of the sensory experience too that seem to be embodied by these rituals. Which is, I know we know that about human memory more general, but it feels like we're talking about something more than just memory here. It's a certain sequence or a certain, sort of amalgamation of memories and procedures that we have, maybe like pigeons in a B.F. Skinner box, put together accidentally, but we can look back and be like, yeah, that was the strategy we used.
We
Right.
have a ritual in my family that it's probably 30 years old now. We call it the breaking of the eggs. And what it is we had a house guest once who broke all of our eggs. And now each year on that day, we break all of the eggs in the house, kind of in commemoration of that special event. It's really gotten built in a lot of ways. And it really brings me back to that moment when that person broke all of the eggs in my house.
Yeah. I was actually going to ask, this is good. I know you're the marketing expert. This is a good teaser for the after party here, the after conversation. I was going to ask for your favorite and most important ritual in general, but you have a lot of important relationships. You mentioned a wife, you mentioned a daughter, parents. I know you were very close with your grandmother, but I'm going to go to the top of that list. Think about, I don't know, your college roommate who you met, let's say 31 years ago. And who 31 years later would be asked to interview you during a Q&A based on your book. What ritual sort of could bring together two individuals who've traveled such a course like that over the course of 31 years? You can think about it. It can be a teaser for the after conversation. But having known you for that period of time and watched your own evolution from the 17, 18-year-old wide-eyed, bushy-tailed first-year student we were talking about to world-renowned expert has been quite a trip. So thank you for allowing me to share it. What's that?
For bald, middle-aged man, I think.
We did have more hair here, less here. But Mike, thanks so much for sharing the sort of the science of rituals, but also the personal way in which it's made an impact on your life, and I think it have an impact on all of ours at work, with close relationships, on our own as individuals. It's been really interesting. So thanks.
Thanks so much, Sam. Really appreciate it.
Mike and Sam, I think the two of you have a future when you're done with this like Harvard Tufts thing. You guys can do a little thing, a show, I think. It's very entertaining, very smart, very fast paced. Mike, I have just been watching your face as Sam runs his narrative, and you just keep getting these smiles, which are the smiles of a person who's known someone for 3 decades, and you just almost see where it's going, and Sam just keeps feeding it to you, keep putting the ball on the tee. It's really great. It's excellent. Thank you so much for a great, enjoyable, informative, fun conversation for the holidays as a DAZE for sure. I want to remind folks, both of these wonderful humans are going to join us for after hours, so you can ask your own questions. I'm sure there's going to be more stories to tell. I'm already thinking about my son's nighttime routine, and we'll probably hear some stories from some folks. So how do you get to come to after hours? Buy a copy of Mike's book. It is just so great. The Ritual Effect. There's so much in there. And Fan is going to be gifting a second copy to everyone who comes to after hours, a second copy of that book. It's a buy one, get one. What kind of deal is that? Surely you know someone that you can gift this book to, clearly. So come hang out with us in after hours. They're going to be there for another 55 minutes. It's our last program of 2024. Everyone's in a loosey-goosey mood, so come hang out. It's going to be a good time. We're at 7:59. We ask you one quick question. We'll probably get it a little faster or more in after hours. You came in before on the Zoom registration form. Emmy had wanted to know, you got any advice at all about how to build some rituals with teens and tweens? Because, they're always so open to those conversations with mom and dad. Just can't wait to build a ritual with mom and dad. Do you got any quick hack on how to even get the eyes up off the phone?
I have some thoughts, but I'll save the practical things because I have to tell a super quick story, which is in my family, we have a gratitude ritual at dinner every night. You have to say something you're grateful for because we think gratitude is an important value. And my co-author, Liz Dunn, tried that with her family. She has one son. I have one daughter. She said, we're going to do a gratitude ritual tonight. And her son is a teenager. And he said, I'm grateful that we don't have a gratitude ritual. So I feel the questioner's pain of trying to get kids engaged and involved with these things. We have a limited window as parents to force them to do things, and it gets harder and harder.
Love it. We'll discuss further in just a minute. So it's 8 o'clock. Everyone, thanks for coming. Fans are going to resume programming as of right now. I don't know when our first event is, Jan 16, something like that. It's going to be, we got an incredible lineup for winter. Can't wait. Come hang out for another hour with these guys. Can't wait. Thank you for joining us. I hope to see you all in about 5 minutes. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Sam. We'll see you in just a few minutes.